Ripley's Believe It or Not. I think one of my favorite shows growing up was In Search Of, that was hosted by Leonard Nimoy. Right. I'm a huge Trekkie. I love science fiction fantasy. I thought actually I was writing science fiction when I started the book, and turns out it was really more of a paranormal thriller. So, but I grew up watching those shows, and I like anything on the Travel Channel, the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, which I think is really ironic. There's not a lot of travel going on the Travel Channel these days. Not a lot of history going on the History Channel. I think the only one that's still actually doing what they say they're going to do is the Food Network. They still cook food.
People are still cooking, even.
But there's so many great, travel adventure shows, and that was kind of how that started. It was kind of a mashup of some of the favorite ones that I like to watch.
So just to brief everybody, this Veritas Codex series involves a television reporter, Lauren, who has a show kind of like In Search Of. And of course, to get material for the show, she has to go on great adventures looking for, well, in the first book, Bigfoot, right?
Right.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say that's kind of where it started was, I grew up I was an oil field brat growing up, and we lived for a while up in Seattle. So I spent some time in the Pacific Northwest. And I think that was like the first real legend I remember hearing about was Bigfoot. And so I've always had kind of a fascination with the big hairy giant. So, a lot of people like to have a lot of fun with it. He's kind of a big popular thing right now in television commercials. Yes. Daryl is out there. So Smart. It was just, something I love to read stories about. So it was like, that was the perfect place to start.
So this strikes me as the classic example of what I often preach in books and retreats and whatnot. Write what you love. That's what you're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. All the books are things that I love, mysteries I want to see solved. I don't know that I believe Bigfoot's really out there, but nobody's been able to prove it one way or another. And, I'd like to know the answer.
I'm just remembering as you say that I it didn't even occur to me that I had put Bigfoot in one of those Ben Kincaid legal thrillers, because that makes sense. I think it's Silent Justice, although I may be wrong. But I have to tell you, in my case, it was a guy in a suit, because that's what it looks like to me when I see those videos. But
exactly,
your book goes a different direction, much more interesting direction. How'd you come up with the characters for your series?
They're just kind of little mashups of people that I knew. And, sometimes you just have this idea in your head of somebody. I talk about my imaginary friends. When I have writer's block, it's when my imaginary friends aren't talking to me. So I have these people in my head that will come to me, and they'll come forward and they'll say, this is my story and I want you to tell it. And, it's a little wacky, but that's just kind of how I find some of the characters. It's based on somebody that I knew, or maybe a combination of people that I know. I find sometimes my husband's little habits end up on the page.
Oh, really? In the villain or what?
No, not usually. It's usually one of the good guys, just the way somebody takes their coffee or what they tend to eat first on the plate. Those are things that I've noticed, early on in my relationship with my husband when we were dating that were different and unusual to me, but have become, part of our daily routine now.
Well, it's the first thing that pops into your mind, right? Because you see it all the time. I've got a feeling, which I could be wrong, but I kind of think your protagonist, Lauren, seems a little bit like you. Am I right about that?
Yeah, she and I have a lot of things in common. When you start, you tell people that you're a writer, they always want to know, what do you write? And I'm like, well, I write about Bigfoot. And they're like, oh, that's nice. And so Lauren doesn't get a lot of respect for being a scientist in a field. She's a biological anthropologist, but, people, you're just out there making money on television. You're just looking for Bigfoot. And so she doesn't get a lot of respect. And so sometimes as a writer, you think, well, I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't publish right away, is like I wasn't sure what people would say about somebody writing, stories about Bigfoot. But now I'm to a point where I don't care. I enjoy it.
There, and that's the key, because if you enjoy it, I guarantee there'll be other people who will enjoy it too. The secret, of course, is finding those people and making them aware of your book. Any tips on how to make that sizable challenge possible?
Well, I've done a lot of research in what people are reading these days and what people believe about cryptids. And there are more people who believe in Bigfoot than believe in other things that we know to be true. And I was really fascinated when I started looking at, It's more men that believe in Bigfoot, but women tend to believe more in paranormal encounters. So there's all kinds of research. There's a report that's released every year on cryptids and people's beliefs and opinions about this. And so I'm finding now that I have a tribe out there. I'm going to find them, and I'm going to make friends with all of them.
That's a good plan. There's still all kinds of programming. You mentioned the History Channel and I don't know where else, but there are all kinds of shows still. I think In Search Of was the first, but it has lots of progeny programming that are investigating these kinds of mysteries.
Yeah, I saw somewhere the statistics, there's like 6,000 different movies and TV shows that deal with paranormal of some kind or another, whether it's ghosts, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Mayan apocalypse, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm. And you have some special insight into the Mayan culture, having been there, right?
I did. We got to go to Chichen Itza when we were on the writers' cruise, and that was a bucket list item because book 2 is actually set at Chichen Itza.
Just to inform the listeners, that was the WriterCon cruise that, thank goodness, we got to do when we did, because who knows when there'll be another cruise ship going anywhere. But
exactly.
that was a great time. So what can people look forward to in the future? What's going to happen next for Lauren?
Well, we're gonna find some answers to some mysteries in the world. I try to make sure that all my characters have an itch they can't scratch. Lauren thinks she doesn't want this, and then she turns up discovering that that's really, after all, what she does want. So we have lots of adventures coming up. We've got the Mayan apocalypse is going to be episode 2 or book 2, if you will. She has some family conflict that she's going to have to figure out a way to work through. She's got adventures where they go looking for, the ruins at Easter Island. There's been a lot of new research coming out of there. There's new research that's come out just in the last week about Stonehenge. There are so many mysteries out there that Lauren and Rowan and the team are going to get a chance to explore. And I think as long as new discoveries are being made and new science is going on out there, I'll always have an idea for book X, whatever the next one is.
Good. I hope so. Even though the Veritas Codex is your first book, you've been writing for a while. What are some of the lessons you've learned? Things you didn't know at first.
I have lots of lessons learned. The best thing you can do is have an editor. Mm-hmm. I type super fast. The last time I took a time typing test was 145 words a minute.
Wow.
And then I broke the program. So get an editor. And don't think that you're just Little Miss Sunshine perfect every time you write something. There's always room to improve, and I'm learning that quickly. But write what you love. Write that story that you want to read. Write that book that you need to tell. And I've got a lot of them on the back burner that I hope at some point will all come forward and get published. Whether I self-publish those or whether, go through a traditional publisher, I've got those stories to tell. And I like to tell the stories. I love to listen to people. I like to interview people. I like to know, what's your story? What's your background? I used to sit and listen to my great uncles talk about World War II. And the only time they would ever really talk about it is if they were drinking beer. And when I was a kid, of course, that was scandalous, but they only did it when they were fishing. So I'd learned to go fishing with my uncles, just so I could listen to the stories. So there's stories there that are just sitting in the back burner waiting for me to figure out how I'm going to tell the stories. Mm-hmm. So there's always something coming down the pipe.
I predict we're going to get a lot more books from you, Betsey. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Thanks again, Betsey, for being on the podcast. Since I mentioned editing and WriterCon during this podcast, let me just remind everyone that in addition to the annual writing conference, I also offer various small group writing opportunities, writing workshops during the course of the year. And this year, for the first time ever in December, I'm doing one online, understanding that some people are still hesitant to get out and travel much, and some of you are so far away that you might not want to travel even in the best of worlds, which this isn't. But online, everybody's right there, basically. I test drove this approach to the writing retreats during the summer, And it seemed to work really even better than I expected. I'm always going to prefer liking having people in the room and being able to talk to them, but this works pretty well. And in this retreats, because it's just a small group of people, 10 or fewer, usually fewer, I can give everyone the one-on-one attention they deserve. I read manuscripts before it begins. I read your work every night. And everything that we do, the critique, the talks on different topics, it's all targeting the works in progress of the people in the small group workshop. So if that would interest you, visit my website, williambernhardt.com, click on the Red Sneaker Writers tab, and you can read about not only the online workshop in December, but another one planned live and in person for next year. The most important thing, Red Sneaker Writers, of course, is that you keep writing, and one way or another, try to get some useful feedback. So until next time, keep writing, and remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit.